this part of the we do record this part of the meeting so that we can put it up on YouTube and Facebook and so forth, give people the opportunity to watch who weren't able to make it. If you don't want your face shown, which I completely understand, you're welcome to turn off your video, when we talk together. Other than that, I hope you've had a chance to think of a few things to talk about. Jim in Canada, hello.
Hi, Paul. Um, yeah, I was wondering if we could talk a bit about developing mindfulness outside of the seated practice, day-to-day activities. When I'm walking, when I'm eating, when I'm doing things like this, I do try to pursue mindfulness as much as I can, but it kind of either happens or it doesn't. When it does happen, I stay with it as whatever number of moments it wants to stick around, and then it disappears. Um, Walking, Alan used to talk about systematic mindfulness, and sometimes I use the electrical poles and say, well, I'm going to walk, be mindful till this next electrical pole.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I walk past five of them and realize, oh yeah, I was going to be mindful. I don't know if how much we can talk about this, but it's, I think I could be doing more, I guess. And I'm not sure.
Hmm. Well, I think before we start talking about techniques or how much should one be mindful, it for me the most important thing is like, do we understand the value? Do we understand that there is an intrinsic reward from being mindful? And by being mindful, we mean actively noting what we're consciously aware of when we're consciously aware of it. Um, it seems to me understanding why we do it is intrinsic and very important. So you've got a grounding in that, in a purpose. So you've got a strong sense of purpose. That we don't, we're not I think it is an error to practice mindful noting, as a way to conform to what we believe is being asked of us of the Buddha's teaching. I mean, you have for me, it has to come from really wanting to delve into and explore the nature of conscious experience. That one recognizes there is a deep intrinsic value in doing this. That through doing it, we're able to uncover the secrets of the universe directly. Not It's not about trying to conform to the Buddha's teaching, although as we go along and our mindfulness deepens, we start to recognize everything that the Buddha talks about as being a description of reality, that we see that it is so, that things really are transient. Uh, well, we could go on, but
Mhm.
so firstly, it's about, I think, reflecting on the value of mindfulness, the intrinsic value that it has for us in terms of overcoming suffering. So understanding life, overcoming the ignorance that causes us to passionately want things to be different and therefore suffer. And so it's an exploration driven by our own inquisitiveness rather than the attempt to conform, rather than the attempt to try to get it right. I would love for everyone to abandon the attempt to get mindfulness right. Instead, I would much, much, much prefer that people just enjoy exploring their experience.
Mhm.
Yeah. Then, then there's the how, and really you can. It helps enormously to take some time. Whether it's just walking the dog or walking to the car or doing the washing up. It is getting a section where you're of your time in your day where you say, okay, this is the time for me to consciously set up a period of mindful noting with a
Mhm.
great sense of why you're doing it. And then really, I think the key is like keeping it extraordinarily simple and straightforward and choosing the most obvious things to note. So if you say it's going for a walk and you decide, okay, well, I am going to practice in the formal way of setting up a point that I'm going to be mindful until. So if it's telephone poles or electrical poles, and I'm just going to be mindful from walking from this pole to that pole, fair enough. But within that, what are we doing? And so I think the first port of call is mindfulness of body, mindfulness of the material aspect, because that's the grossest aspect of conscious experience is the material. So what would that be in practical sense? That would be noting shape and color, noting sounds, noting tactile sensations, noting push and pull and pressure and temperature, just the very obvious things that go to make up our physical experience. And that seems to me the most obvious entry point into a period of mindfulness, whether you're attempting it for the first time or you've been doing it for years and years and years. Getting into the body, getting into body mindfulness. Then, as a consequence of getting into the body, we start to become more aware of, say, states of mind, like whether we're happy or sad or irritable or feeling lonely or whatever it might be. And so we get a general sense of the state of the mind, and then the feeling components of the experiences start to emerge, like whether they're pleasant feelings or unpleasant feelings or neutral feelings. Yeah, but it starts from like just being very, very, very clear about one's intentions and a sense of purpose. Create delineating a period of time for mindfulness practice. So you're not trying to be mindful all day, and then starting with the most obvious things, so that you're not, and it's not even looking at transients. It's just shape, color, sound, sensation, pressure, warmth, coolness, the things that you notice in your physical experience as you're going along. From that, then the characteristics of what you're looking at start to emerge. It starts to become more and more obvious that things are transient just by looking, just by noting. Yeah. So you're not
Mhm.
trying to get anywhere.
All right.
Because if you're trying to get somewhere, if you're doing the mindfulness to get something else, for a reward, that's an extrinsic reward, which means you're in a state of feeling unrewarded. Whereas if you recognize the intrinsic reward the, that is freely afforded us, the fact that there's all this fascinating phenomena actually taking place, then you're not looking for an extrinsic reward. Therefore, you recognize there is this inherent reward that comes from the practice, and fascination begins to blossom.
All right.
Is this helping, Jim? Is
Yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, I have to look more at why I'm doing it. Um, and perhaps I'm concurrently focusing on getting somewhere physically while I'm doing this walking. Um, but yeah, sometimes sometimes the pieces of my experience join together in such a way that seems beautiful and lovely, and it's interesting in its own way. Um,
it is, but if we determine that beauty is the objective of mindfulness, we've missed the point,
mhm.
because Sometimes, yes, it is, and increasingly, with the absence of ignoring and with the absence of resistance, one starts to see more deeply the mystery which is contained within every component part of experience. So there is a fascination that emerges. But if we say, I'm doing it in order to experience the beauty of the world, we've missed the point. We're not doing it for that. There is an intrinsic reward that comes from just looking at phenomena as it's happening. And then from that, there is just this natural process of seeing more deeply into the nature of reality, which naturally produces insights that have the effect of rubbing away and dissolving the tendency to crave for life to be different than it is. So we don't need it to give us anything. It's just being, it is just surrendering and allowing and accepting what it is that's unfolding in our experience, pleasant or unpleasant, wanted or unwanted. And through that process of mindfully noting what's there, we naturally start to deepen our understanding of how life actually works.
All right. All right. Thank you.
Dave, did you have a add
Yeah,
on?
thanks. Yeah, I was just thinking, following on from Jim's question, that do you think one of the problems is developing that curiosity and that interest and that mindfulness when we are experiencing difficult states? It's kind of easy to be curious when it's pleasant, or you're walking in the countryside and the birds are singing, but if you're in the middle of Trowbridge and it's raining, it's kind of, that curiosity is hard to generate.
Don't try to generate it, because now we're getting into how do I generate curiosity rather than just practicing mindfulness.
Yeah.
Do you see? We start to create. This is the difficult thing about teaching this stuff, is because the moment I sort of say mystery or beauty or insight or curiosity, everyone's saying, "All right, that's the goal."
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than just practice, just not even practicing. And it's not about trying to get the technique right. It's about literally what can I detect in my experience right now? What is happening in terms of seeing? What's happening in terms of hearing? What's happening in terms of tasting and touching and smelling, without any without it having to give you anything back. Yeah, it doesn't have to give you curiosity back or fascination. It doesn't have to give you beauty back. It doesn't have to give you mystery back. It's like, I understand that through there's this overarching sense of purpose, which is, oh yeah, by noting things, by mindfully noting what's happening in my experience, this process of deepening insight will occur. So all I have to do is content myself with noting what's unfolding. Does that make sense, Dave?
No, that does. I think it's the same sort of, trap Jim was in, if you like. It's just a different manifestation of it, that sort of wanting something from experience, whether it's the same thing.
Because do you think that it's like we want signals? We want some sign that we're getting it, right,
Yes.
or that we're progressing.
Yes. Yeah, I think it is. Or it's a sort of subtle dissatisfaction somehow. It's not it's kind of mindfulness or curiosity for a reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll have to think about it.
yeah. It's almost like giving to get. If I give
Yeah,
you my mindful awareness, you
yeah,
give me beauty, you will give me mystery, you will give me this, you will give me that, rather than just looking, because you already have it all. This is the whole point. You have it all. there is nothing which has not been given to us. It's like, this is remarkable, but everyone is asleep to it. They're so busy in trying to make their life right, trying to be a better person, trying to improve, trying to get on, trying to accomplish. They're absolutely asleep to the simplicity of the remarkableness that any of this is unfolding whatsoever. The infinite mystery is just pouring through every component part of experience. But we say, oh no, I have to, if I give my mindful attention to this, you've got to give me something back. And so it becomes a matter of an extrinsic reward. Once you're doing it in order to get something back, you are in a state of dissatisfaction. You are actually feeling unrewarded in that moment because you haven't got the reward yet. And so maybe it's a faith issue.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just the willingness to say, okay, I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the converted here with you, Dave. But it's like, I have faith that the Buddha's teaching is true and it works. And I'm willing to explore my experience free from any contract, free from any promise of getting anything in return, just for the sake of mindfully noting what's actually taking place in order to understand what's taking place, in order to see it. And if we're willing to do it like that, then over time, through practice, we start to see more and more of what's really, really going on. We genuinely become our own wise masters. So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Mandy, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Paul. I'm wondering, because I'm also trying to be mindful of my thoughts, what kind of thoughts there are, what kind of thoughts are steering my actions, or maybe perhaps during communication with others, what is happening in my thoughts, which I always thought is being very mindful, but now you're telling me that actually I'm trying to improve myself as a better person and to understand my thoughts, and maybe also to be able to do something, respond on a different way on my thinking. And so it helps me during,
Well, we can't guarantee in what way we will be helped. There's no question at all that if someone is more mindful and they're mindfully noting, they become more aware of their thoughts and the intentions behind their thoughts. They become more aware of which kinds of thoughts and intentions lead to painful results and which leads to pleasant results. So there is unquestionably an improvement, unquestionably. But we can't predict, we can't insist what that improvement will be. It comes spontaneously through the cultivation of mindfulness and the cultivation of wisdom. There comes to be a seeing about which are the things which are helpful and which are the things that are not helpful. So it's not preordained. It's not like a preordained improvement. It comes spontaneously. Yeah, so things like the subtleties of keeping the precepts. At the beginning of when we keep keeping the precepts, we're just trying not to kill anyone. It's a pretty wide path. As time goes on and our mindfulness improves and our wisdom into states of mind and the intentions behind things improves, then what we are personally prepared to accept and not accept in terms of keeping precepts, like the subtleties of speech patterns, say, it might get so subtle that no one even realizes that we might have broken a precept, but in our own minds, because of the painful feeling that was produced, we go, yeah, it was subtle, but I still don't like that. And so we make an adjustment. That adjustment is organic and spontaneous and comes from real mindfulness. It doesn't come from sort of projecting this idea of what an improved Mandy or an improved Paul is going to be like. Do you see the difference?
Yes, I do.
I mean, none of us would practice the Buddha's teaching if it didn't lead to some form of improvement.
Yeah, true. So you do see this as a practice then also,
See, what is a practice? Sorry.
being mindful of the thinking.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's 4 foundations of mindfulness: mindfulness of body, all the material aspects of conscious experience; mindfulness of feeling; mindfulness of the general state of the mind; and then what we call mindfulness of dhammas, mindfulness of mental objects, which would include all the hindrances, 7 factors of enlightenment, 4 noble truths. So it includes craving, and so all the ways in which all the mental formations that go on are included. However, going back to what I was talking about with Jim, it's like, well, what is the entry point? It seems to me that the Buddha put the foundation of mindfulness of materiality as the first foundation for a reason. It's the easiest to start with. And as we go along, then naturally, quite naturally, we start to become more aware of thought processes. Does that help, Mandy?
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, maybe it's a nuanced point, this, but the difference between, when, because it's so easy that like if I say practicing mindfulness leads to an improvement in your mental health, it's like that then becomes the goal. And unless we see an improvement in our mental health, we think we're failing with the practice. And we're not failing with the practice, because all you have to do is just be mindfully aware of whatever is taking place and let the results take care of themselves. And that makes the practice simple. It's just practicing mindfulness is a simple thing. It's just mindfully noting whatever we happen to be conscious of at this moment.
Paul, can you then say there's a difference between the long term and the short term? So in the long term, you do have a kind of a goal, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. You do have kind of an overall idea of how it will serve you. But in the short term, in the daily practice, you're not focused on that goal. You're focused on practicing the mindfulness.
Yeah, sure. If I want to get to Bath, the city of Bath, I either have to walk there, take the car, catch a bus. I don't have to be obsessed with getting to Bath. I just have to deal with whatever's in front of me.
Yeah.
And I think this is where, also with meditation, this is where it goes wrong for people, in the sense that they become obsessed with trying to get to somewhere with their practice, rather than just relaxing into the moment, resting in the moment, content to note whatever arises, and let that, if you like, long-term purpose take care of itself.
Yeah, that's a nice metaphor. Thank you.
Yeah. No, because you're absolutely right. If there were no purpose behind the Buddha's teaching, we wouldn't do it. Of course, there's the cessation of suffering is the fundamental reason for practicing mindfulness. Andrew, hello.
Hello. Hi, Paul. I'm new, as you know, to this, so I'm listening and trying to find a foothold as I go forward. I just was aware there's kind of on one level, it seems very easy. You insist on making it in a way, so you mustn't try too hard. You must just be in that space, and enlightenment will be conscious. You'll be made conscious and aware. And yet, on another time it seems a real effort and a real journey and something I have to apply myself to. I just note those two things really. I mean, there's so much I don't know and I need to experience, and yet I rather like it when you say, "Don't worry, just be," and that's fine. And I sort of relax then a bit.
Yeah, Andrew, I think one of my over 20 years of trying to help people, to guide people, it's more and more it is about encouraging people to let go of the complexity. That the thing that people need the most help with is faith. That because it's the doubt that causes people to try too hard. The doubt that it can't possibly be this simple. But actually it is. It's like literally if I walk to Bath, it is literally 1 foot in front of the other. There is no other magical way of getting there. It's 1 foot in front of the other. And I can retain the sense in which, yes, at some point I will reach Bath, and I might have to go up hills and, through tunnels, or I might have to do all kinds of things on my way there, but literally it will be 1 foot in front of another. And so what I'm trying to encourage people to do is to have the faith that, yes, you will get there. All you have to do is practice mindful noting of whatever is uppermost in your conscious experience in this moment. And I think people struggle with that idea that it could literally, in the end, boil down to that. And there are lots of challenges along the way, undoubtedly. You're absolutely right. Sometimes you just have to stick at it no matter what. I've seen, it's so sad. I've seen so many people quite capable of doing this who've walked away from it because there was a time when they needed to endure no matter what, and they chose not to, and which is perfectly fine and perfectly reasonable. Who knows how long we have to go round the rounds of samsara in order to eventually make an end of suffering. So there are times when you have to just endure no matter what. You have to just stick there. You sat down to do a half-hour meditation. You just stick there and stay with it and get through no matter what. You're on retreat and you're really, really having a really hard time because there's so much frustration, so much resistance, so much wanting life to be different than it is. Don't leave the retreat. Stick at it.
It's exactly what we were talking about in our breakout, Dave, weren't we? And Hilda and Dave, you were saying, at times you found it challenging, didn't you? And I was listening to that, and Hilda was saying, now how much she enjoys the silence of it. And I can see both really. I can see in a way, a sort of blissful simplicity, but I can also see it's it's something one has to engage with.
Yes, the root cause of the problem that makes it difficult is the ignorance that creates craving for things to be different than they are, and then that resistance makes life a sorry trial. There is no other way through than I don't want to say confronting that because that sounds too aggressive, but allowing those resistances to arise and learning that simple mindful contemplation of the unwanted. You can sit with irritation, you can sit with frustration, and they can be sources of fascination with mindfulness practice. Yes, of course, it requires a certain detachment, but that detachment comes from regular practice of meditation and mindful noting. And gradually you learn that you can actually sit with the painful and the unwanted And you start to see how it's the resistance to those things that creates the noise. It's the resistance to those things that is the real problem, not the actual painful feeling or the unwanted perception or whatever it might be. So yes, my tendency in teaching or guiding is to bring people back to the simplicity of the practice, but that does include, therefore, having to engage with that resistance and learning to be able to see it, because that's where the wisdom comes from. When you see that what you're resisting is actually transient, you don't have to resist it. So I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's simple.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Big difference.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amy, hello.
Hi, Paul.
Hey, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I just put a little message in the chat, actually. So I guess my question is around how long to observe for. So for me, it can take a little while to feel into sensations in my body or to recognize what thoughts I'm having. And I know that there's that instruction to gently bring yourself back to the breath. But I've sort of tried doing the noting and it being quite quick. And I'm just thinking if I'm doing that, then it just feels like, I don't think I could sit there and go, oh, I have that thought frequently, or I have this feeling frequently, because I'm trying to bring myself back to the breath. So I just wanted some guidance in terms of that. Where does it cross the line between dwelling on something or actual helpful observation and noting?
Thank you. It's a really good question. And it is really early days for you. And I'd say that these things tend to iron themselves out with practice. I always like to say we want a representative sample. We don't have to catch everything. And so I would illustrate it like, for instance, when we meditate at the meditation center, you'll often get noises from the town. You might get an ambulance, siren, or you'll get the twittering of the birds, or the sound of the traffic coming down the hill. And it's perfectly all right, because it's not about trying to get it right. It's about exploring our conscious experience. So it's perfectly permissible, it's perfectly fine, perfectly all right for somebody to become very interested in the sounds, say, of the birds singing, and just listening and observing how the sounds are arising and how they produce pleasant feelings, and just to dwell on that for a little while. And then perhaps the mind naturally then returns, if it's formal seated practice, perhaps the mind then just naturally lets go of that, and perhaps you then bring it back to the breathing process. Then a moment later, or a few moments later, maybe a thought process picks up, maybe planning some nice outing or something, and the mind just gets hooked into that and starts enjoying that, and we forget all about being mindful for a little while. And then at some point, the mindfulness kicks back in and we go, oh, I've been planning. That's fine. That's all good practice. So you haven't gone wrong. It's just that's where the mind went. And so we're, a few minutes thinking about that. Okay. So we acknowledge that. We acknowledge that now we've become mindful of that thinking. It's no longer there. And then we can return the attention back to the breath for a little while. So it's a light attention on the breath, which isn't concerned about the mind becoming interested in something else. Yeah. And then we might discover that actually there's this strong attachment to this sensual planning, and the mind keeps wanting to go back to it again and again and again. And we start to see that and investigate that and wonder why that's the case. And and so it just starts to develop from there, and we start to get more deeply into seeing what's actually going on. So I would say relax with it. Don't feel at all that you have to note everything. That there's a light attention placed on the breathing process, but there's an allowance for the fact that the mind becomes interested in other things, and it's including those other things in the practice. And gradually, over time, you start to see more and more of what's actually taking place. Does that help?
Yeah, so it's just as important to kind of allow those thoughts to come in, the mindfulness just to kick in naturally, and the curiosity to kick in naturally, and then almost you'll just come back to the breath quite naturally too, because you're being mindful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I wish I just said that, to be honest. That's a perfect. Yeah, it's so natural. And I think we presume that we have to be so in control of it and so on top of it, and we don't. It's just we're allowing this stuff to happen, and we're just responding to what happens by mindfully noting things, acknowledging where the mind goes, and then mindfulness is a naturally occurring mental quality. We would not be able to conduct ourselves in this conversation if there were no mindfulness. So it's not something we're having to invent. It's just, we're just following the nature of it, following the flow of it.
It's almost carrying on as normal. You're just adding in the curiosity bit and the noting, really.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Thank you for explaining it to me. That's brilliant. That's absolutely perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Emma. Sorry, you're muted. There we go.
Hi, Paul.
Hiya.
Hi, I just wondered if you could explain to me dependent origination. I seem to see a lot, but I'm struggling with this whole concept of dependent origination, and seeing it and what I can do when I'm being in meditation to increase my understanding of it, what things I could be noting or looking out for, or
I'd say just don't worry about it. Because again, this is the thing I was going back to before. It's like we create this sense in which I'm supposed to understand condition-dependent origination, and I'm not understanding it. So now I'm in a state of because I don't confusion because I don't understand it. The understanding, it's having the faith that the understanding of it will come from, most importantly, mindful noting over a protracted period of time, and the gradual deepening of our awareness of what's really going on, allied to or supported by a certain amount of intellectual study, intellectual contemplation. And I can certainly help you with the intellectual contemplation of it. However, when we go to practice, we have to put all the study to one side and not take the study into the practice. So the practice isn't trying to corroborate what we've read. It is literally just mindfully noting what is present in our experience. And through time, those two channels, the channel of intellectual inquiry and meditative inquiry, come together, because you start to see what you've read about is actually so in experience. And that's when you get condition-dependent origination. So in the most simple way I can explain condition-dependent origination, I always use the same examples because a rainbow is not a thing in itself. It only exists when certain conditions come to be. If there's rain, if there's sunlight, we get a rainbow. Yeah. If the atmospheric conditions are different, a rainbow doesn't happen. A rainbow doesn't exist somewhere and then comes out. It doesn't exist in some sort of ground of being and then just appear when the right conditions are there. It literally doesn't have any existence whatsoever. As the conditions come together, the rainbow is formed. It's illusory. It's empty of any intrinsic reality. And when the conditions change again, it just disappears like it had never been there. And when we look with insight at really simple aspects of our conscious experience, like hearing, we start to recognize that that same process is true when it comes to the sound of the church bells or the sound of the traffic, whatever it might be. It's illusory. It doesn't have that intrinsic objective reality that we thought it did. It's the sound only appears because there is a working ear, sense base, and there is hearing. If there's no hearing, there's no sound. If there's no sound, there's no hearing. They arise in dependence upon one another and then cease instantly. And it doesn't have to, you don't have to get it intellectually. You just, this, coming back to this faith thing, it's just resting in the faith that if I persevere with this and I'm enjoying the practice of mindful noting, then gradually these things start to stand out. They start to, you start to go, well, of course it is. I always knew that. Yeah. Do you see the angle I'm coming from with this, Emma?
Yeah. I think I just sometimes need a bit more of the intellectual, as well. I know that I understand about then forgetting that when you come into meditation and not taking it into, but I sometimes need that kind of, I need to do some more, I need to do the reading as well. For me, that, it just.
Yes. Okay. I appreciate that. All I would say is then that, therefore, that any confusion or concern is you're allowed not to know. You're allowed to have a burgeoning intellectual appreciation of the Buddha's teaching without being able to get it all in one go. If we could become enlightened through just reading the books, then that's what the Buddha would have guided us towards. But he didn't. He guided us towards mindfulness. He said mindfulness is the one way of overcoming suffering. And so the intellectual stuff is a necessary support. And for different people, there will be a different amount of intellectual inquiry that they are interested to do. But it only becomes a confusion or a concern because we believe that we should get it intellectually in order to be able to understand it through experience. But it's the other way around. It's through understanding it in experience that the intellectual appreciation comes.
Yeah.
So I say, so for everyone, the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha's higher teaching, his teaching on ultimates, is an absolutely fascinating intellectual feast. It really is. However, that intellectual feast will not yield enlightenment. It's only through the application of mindful noting to experience that will actually make the difference. So we just have to treat the intellectual side in that nuanced way of recognizing, as Emma has quite rightly identified, that when we go to practice meditation, we leave the books on the shelf. We don't take the books with us. And so, so we're vulnerable. It's a faith thing again. It's having the faith to say, it's all right for me to practice mindful noting without me already knowing. So much of this is about faith. It really is. Was there any other aspects of that, Emma, you wanted to talk about? Or I think that's covered it?
I think it's time and just time and practice. And I think that, there may be trying to grasp. I don't know if I'm trying to grasp at something. Maybe
I don't know, for whatever reason. I mean, I really got into perhaps not as much as, say, your average Burmese monk, but I did get into the Buddha's higher teaching. I did delve quite deeply into it because I found it fascinating. However, when it came to the actual practice, for some reason, I just had this innate understanding that when I practice, I literally just practice mindful noting. And gradually, through that process of mindful noting, I started to be able to discern the difference between very subtle differences between states of consciousness, incredibly subtle, because I was able to finally unite the mindful noting with the intellectual studies. So I started to note different types of consciousness, or that ability to note different types of consciousness was supported by that intellectual inquiry. But it's always got to be that way around, because otherwise it literally just becomes academic.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Anybody else have any thoughts, observations, questions? Dave, hi.
Hi. I was just thinking about the kind of mindfulness movement, and I use the Insight Timer app for meditations to time the meditation at the end. You sort of finish the meditation, the bell goes, and then it says, how are you feeling? I get really irritated by it because I sort of think, well, I don't, it's as if the kind of there's this push that if you meditate, if you are mindful, you will be happier. That's the kind of the inbuilt logic of it, that if you meditate for an hour, you should, however you're feeling at the start, you're going to be feeling a lot better at the end. I just wondered, I guess it's just a comment really, but yeah.
So do you detect within that then that there might be a different purpose at work? Or there might be an assumption at work?
I think there is an assumption. There's a massive assumption that mindfulness leads to happiness, and you can correlate a period of meditation with a post-meditative state of happiness. That's my.
So it is practicing. If we just say it's practicing meditation, it's practicing meditation for a state of happiness.
Yeah.
Or a state of tranquility or calm.
I think that's the presumption. Yeah.
Yeah. And to a certain extent that will work. If somebody is genuinely noting the arising and passing away of phenomena, they're not getting attached. They're not wanting life to be different than it is. And when there's no attachment at that time, and there's no wanting life to be different than it is at that time, the mind is naturally happy. But the problem is, it's so if it's successful, it leads to what I call the puddle of bliss, which is temporary. If it fails, it leads someone to believe that somehow practicing mindfulness doesn't lead to happiness, and they're full of doubt and they abandon the attempt because they don't see the deeper aspect of this, which is that all states of happiness are transient. All states of bliss are transient. People don't practice mindfulness in order to observe transience. They observe transience in order to experience some happiness. If they're, like I say, if they're successful, they will experience a period of an absence of resistance, and so there's happiness. But it goes no deeper than that. We're practicing mindful noting not in order to experience happiness, but to uncover the roots, the depths of the causes of craving, which is an ignorance and not seeing, not knowing, not understanding the true nature of reality. Now, when you get right down into the roots and you dissolve the roots of craving and ignoring, what you're left with is your natural state, which is sublimely happy and peaceful. Yeah. So again, it's creating this idea of I am practicing mindfulness for this, for happiness, and everything is predicated on the experience of happiness. And if happiness doesn't arise, what happens? There's suffering. And if happiness does arise, but then we're robbed of it. Actually, I have to say that people don't want, it's because people don't want to experience worry. They don't want to experience anxiety. They don't want to experience fear. They don't want to experience irritation and frustration. They don't want to experience painful feelings, which is completely understandable. But it's short-sighted. Does that help, Dave? Do you think I'm getting closer to it?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I guess, you know, I sort of, it's this is what I think it's like understanding that the purpose of the mindfulness practice is development of wisdom, not the development of happiness. But maybe that's slightly wrong as well.
No, I think it is. But it's a nuanced thing. It's like going back to an earlier conversation. It's like the wisdom is a spontaneous thing. It's you can't predict it. It's not it's not a fixed outcome that you are heading to. It's something that arises unexpectedly and surprises you. Whereas all of this is predicated on a fixed idea about something that I want to get, I want to be given, I want to have.
Yeah, thank you.
Dave McGill, hello.
Hello. Yeah, so I was actually going to ask a question about noting in the meditation at the start of the session, but everyone has asked lots of different questions about aspects of noting, which I found really helpful.
Yes.
Sometimes I've just wondered when you're noting and then you sort of stop noting and it's sort of just nothing seems to be in your brain. Is that just noting as well? You know, I know that sounds a bit strange, but do you just note absence of noting or absence of thought? Sometimes it doesn't seem like there's any thought or anything happening. But that,
yeah, you can note absences.
Yeah.
You can note that there's no worry, there's no anxiety, there's no sensual desire. But the very fact that there is that contemplation, there is nothing to note, is itself something that can be noted.
Yeah.
So the idea that there, you know, it's a common enough thing that as people's minds calm down, because they're mindfully noting, their minds calm down, and then in the end they say there's nothing going on. Well, there was that thought.
Yeah.
So that can be noted.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly, yeah. You know, there is always something going on. That's the thing. Yeah. That's the thing.
But should you always be noting in your meditation at some level, or can you just switch off the noting?
Why would you not want to note?
Well, just sometimes you're just kind of like in like a trance almost, and you're just sort of sitting there. But is that just,
what is your purpose?
I don't know. That's just a state you kind of go into.
No, what you need to work out what your purpose is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're not doing insight. You're just sort of sitting there, really.
Puddle of bliss.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying a puddle of bliss is not blissful. It most certainly is blissful. It's very, very nice. But it doesn't go anywhere. Doesn't accomplish anything other than give you a temporary reprieve, which is beautiful. But that can be noted too.
Right.
So
you don't need to sort of think anything about it other than noting it. Can
I put this a different way? We've got the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Yeah.
A bit technical, but if you practice mindful noting, so you've got mindfulness, investigation of states, that conditions balanced energy. Balanced energy conditions pleasurable interest. We become fascinated in what's unfolding. Because we're fascinated in what's unfolding, we're not wanting life to be different than it is. Tranquility emerges. Tranquility arises conditioned by that pleasurable interest, right? So those can be noted. So we continue the task of next. So even though we're enjoying a relatively peaceful period of meditation, relatively peaceful can be noted.
Yeah.
Tranquility can be noted. Yeah.
Fine. And then you just wait in that for the next thing to come up.
Always we're waiting. Always we're relaxed and allowing whatever wants to arise next to arise. Yeah. So really, I'd say like a period of tranquility is the absence of resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not always in a state of resistance.
Yeah.
There are plenty of times when that there is no wanting life to be different than it is. So we can enter into a period of meditation where we're just noting and we're not clinging to anything. Things are arising, things are passing away. We're enjoying watching what's taking place. The mind is steady, it's calm, it's composed. We're grounded in the body. We know where we are. We know we're resting in the chair. We're able to note that perception. And it can be lovely. It can be very, very calm and peaceful. It can feel like the town has gone on holiday all of a sudden because there's just this reduction in levels of dissatisfaction, and the white noise of resistance is absent for a while. And that's beautiful and it's lovely. That's not the goal of the practice. It's just what is present in experience now. And so that's what we note.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. I hope that's clear for everyone. It is a slightly nuanced point about, having a sense of purpose and this idea of goals and wanting to be happy. Of course, we all want to be happy. But if you treat happiness as a goal, what state are you in right now? If happiness is your goal, you cannot be in a happy state by definition. So seeking for happiness brings unhappiness. So if you forego the pursuit of happiness as a goal and instead develop this the intrinsic reward that comes from just simply mindfully noting, and you investigate the nature of resistance and craving through experience of actually seeing it unfold, and you gradually dissolve the roots of the problem because you're becoming wise and looking at it, what remains is happiness, which is your natural state, which is our natural state, is to be happy and peaceful and equanimous and composed. But that it's just hidden under the layers and layers of confusion and craving and wanting life to be different, and all of the fury and anxiety and fear that lies on top of that. Yeah. So happiness is not a goal. There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. All right. Looks like I've totally confused you now. Not my intention. And not my problem either. Okay. Any more, or shall we leave it there for this evening? All right. Well, thank you all very much for your contributions.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
I can't off the top of my head remember when the next meeting is. I think it's a little